Welcome back, everyone. Mark Levin is up in a moment, but before that, I just wanted to share some great news with you about our new premium subscription service, Fox Nation. It launches on November the 27th, not far away now. It's an on-demand service with daily live opinion shows and documentaries you're going to love, featuring exclusive content from your favorite Fox News hosts, including me. And for a limited time only, we're offering you the chance to become a part of Fox Nation by signing up as a founder. By becoming a founding member now, you'll get exclusive merchandise that's only available between now and November the 27th. So sign up now at foxnation.com. That is all for tonight. Thanks to all our guests tonight. You can learn more about The Next Revolution by following us at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Mark Levin is up next. I'm Steve Hilton. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next Sunday when The Next Revolution will be televised.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. I have a great guest. Victor Davis Hanson, how are you?
Very good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. As far as I'm concerned, you're one of the leading intellectuals in this country. You write beautifully. You have a regular column. Your books are great. October of last year, you wrote this book, The Second World Wars, A History of World War II. You have a brand new book coming out in March, The Case for Trump. Yeah. That should be interesting, by Basic Books in March. You're a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. You're a professor at California State University. You're a distinguished fellow at Hillsdale College. You've taught at the U.S. Naval Academy. You've taught at Pepperdine University Graduate School. What haven't you done? My Lord, that's interesting. But you know what strikes me about you? You were one of the first intellectuals to support Donald Trump in your writings. I mean, it was gradual, but then why was that?
Well, I think all of us felt that the national ticket was playing by the Marquess of Queensberry rules. We really hadn't seen a vigorous pushback. Remember Lee Atwater in the '88 campaign? We kind of deplored his tactics post factum, but at the time he took apart Dukakis, the contradictions. And so we were losing with Bob Dole and McCain and Romney, 46, 47, 43, even as we were doing well on the conservative side at the local. 1,000 offices lost during the Obama administration. So Trump seemed to be the only one that was unconcerned what the establishment, and by that I don't want to be vague, what university professors said, New York Times said, PBS, NPR, Council on Foreign Relations. He just spoke to the people, and he did it in such a way that was refreshing, and he sort of was psychodramatic that this was an existential war and we were losing it, and we had to fight back and not be worried what people said. And then the other thing was really strange about him, Mark, was he didn't buy into the new demography. It may be true, but he said, you know, you can win by losing California and New York and Illinois, because there are 6 to 8 million people, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, that either didn't vote Republican or they didn't vote at all. And I can win them back with a nationalist, strong jobs, I like the deplorable message. And people thought that was crazy. And so I thought he was just eccentric, and I was a little bit dangerous, I thought, but I thought that he was, at this point, that we're at a point of no return, and he was the anecdote.
We're at a point of no return. You said existential threat.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if we're, say we're the typical of conservative America, you and I, the 65 million that voted for Trump, we look around, it's like a soon opticon. We've got the NFL, NBA, Silicon Valley, Apple, Google, Facebook. We've got Rockefeller. We've got the Brookings Institution. We have cable TV, not just MSNBC and CNN, but the major networks as well. We have NPR. We have PBS. We have the progressive cultural movement. Rap music. Academia is where I am. And we're surrounded, and we think that these institutions don't have as much clout as they do have, and then we get shocked every 4 years that the message just surrounds us, and nobody can We don't have a mechanism for breaking through to the American people and getting a message. And the irony is the message of free market capitalism, limited government, individual liberty is what they thrive for. In their daily lives, they sometimes vote against their interests because this circular octopus, synopticon, whatever you want to call it, we don't get any, you and I, conservatives, traditionalists, we have safe spaces, if I could use their word, where we retreat to. For them, it's a 24/7 relentless entertainment, education, politics, media, and it's overwhelming.
Do you think, the progressives, they wrote about this, that they basically needed to devour society, all these major institutions. Do you think they've largely succeeded?
I do. I think if you, tomorrow, Mark Levin, go to Stanford and you give a lecture on global warming, I don't think you're going to be able to finish that lecture without being interrupted. I think if I go to Stanford or Harvard or Yale and give a lecture on the value of assimilation, integration, and intermarriage with measured, legal, meritocratic, diverse immigration, I won't be able to finish that lecture. I think if I touch somebody in the shoulder and that person files a sexual harassment suit at me at a major corporation, I'm not going to be given due process. And that's besides the social chaos that we live in. I live in an area that's ground zero of illegal immigration, where the Norteños gang is fighting the M13 gang across the street. I'm talking about refined society. So I don't think due process, free speech, the right redress of grievances exist in major areas of American life: corporate, university, foundational life, media.
So you're saying what you've already seen, and I agree with it, the fundamental transformation of America gradually. Is it picking up speed now?
I think it is. I don't want to be pessimistic in the sense that I really admire you, and I admire people at Fox News, I admire people, some in the Republican Party, really brave voices there are in academia that are saying, I'm going to speak out regardless of the consequences. But the Romans and the Greeks believed that luxus, that's a word authors use, luxury, affluence, leads to non-seriousness. I don't want to use the word decadence, but we are such an affluent, leisured society. So somebody from the inner city can have an iPhone with more computing power than 6 IBM mainframes. A guy across the street can come from Mexico and he can be in a Kia, and that can be a better ride than a Mercedes 30 years ago. And I think that's great, but what we don't get with it is some collective gratitude or some sense of accomplishment. Instead, we get, that Kia is not as good as today's Lexus, and therefore the equality result didn't work for me. And that, I don't like the lack of gratitude or the trashing of the system or our ancestors that gave us all this system. And maybe it's the universities have created an arrogant and ignorant cadre of youth, but something's gone wrong.
Isn't this the issue about freedom generally? Freedom is a tremendous thing.
Yeah.
But it also gives opportunity for very evil people to use freedom to destroy freedom.
Yeah.
And isn't that what the framers of the Constitution tried to prevent? They were worried about mobocracy. They were worried about autocracy. And so they create this republic. And there's a constant attack at the foundational principles of the republic. President wins the Electoral College. They want to get rid of the Electoral College. The progressives don't like the fact that the Senate is representative of the states, so they get rid of that, and you have direct election of the senators. They want to get rid of other aspects, separation of powers. They keep building up this fourth branch, this administrative branch of government with 2 million people and growing. That's what they do. It isn't that an attack on our foundational principles, liberty?
Yeah, I think it is. I think they understand what the framers were up to. And their model is not a constitutional Rome that went through Europe through the Enlightenment with Montesquieu separated. It's radical Athenian democracy. On any given day, 51% of the population decide what the law is. There is no constitutional protection. You want to kill Socrates on Monday or murder the Melians on Tuesday, you can do it if you have 51%. So it's been steady. I mean, we went from property qualifications, moderate property, to direct election of senators, and there were some arguments for this. And then, as you say, now it's abolishing the Electoral College and enlarging the Supreme Court now, packing it, enlarging the House of Representatives, maybe 1,000 members. Why people in California say, why does Wyoming get 250,000 people get one senator and we 20 million get one? That's not fair. Let's turn the Senate into the House. But the long-term trajectory is government mandated or sanctioned equality of result. Because they got what they wanted with the civil rights, finally. We had true equality of opportunity. And then they were expecting that everybody would be equal. And human nature being what it is, it's never going to be that way. So they said, or the conservative position is we're not going to be equal, but the poorest person is going to have a pretty good life if he's in a free market economy and a constitutional system. But they say, no, we don't really care what absolute poverty or wealth is. We want everybody to be equal. They would rather have everybody making $20,000 a year than the poor making 50 and somebody making $1 billion. So that's relentless. That's a psychological.
That is a very, very important point that you mentioned. Equality, it's thrown around all the time. Yeah. Now we know what the founders meant by equality. Equality of justice. Yeah. They didn't mean equality of economics. Of course, that would be absurd because it's an impossibility. And human beings, we pride ourselves on human beings are unique individuals. Human beings are created by God. Human beings are one different from the other. But in the civil society, we argue that the law is the law, and everybody should be treated as best as we can, equally in front of a court, in front of the law. But this notion of radical egalitarianism really is a European import.
Yeah. Marx,
Engels, Hegel, Rousseau, which is completely alien to our founders, isn't it?
It is, and it has some precedence in the ancient world. Aristotle, who was a critic of this, said, once a man feels he's equal in one aspect, politics, he assumes he can be equal in every other aspect. Plato said the trajectory is that finally the donkeys and the dogs in Athens have to vote, meaning there will be a destruction of criterion. But you're right, it takes up speed in the Enlightenment in Europe, and it bifurcates, and we thought we were saved from it because the Anglo-Scottish tradition was more limited government, very deep skepticism of the cycles of the French Revolution, and the European continental model is a model that progressives choose, and they have a view that human nature is by nature, a Rousseauian view that we're born into chains, the church, the community, the family, and it's the duty of government to take off those chains and let everybody be liberated, and then they'll naturally be happy, which is sort of our collective nightmare. But we're headed to a radical egalitarian society in aspects that transcend politics, almost every imaginable facet. And I just meant sports, culture, entertainment, movies. That's the message.
And they advance this notion, tell me if I'm right or wrong, of populism.
Yeah.
When in fact it's authoritarianism.
Yeah.
People believe that they've democratized some program, some issue, some aspect of society, when in fact it's not democratized at all. In fact, it is decisions from on high. The intellectual elites, which they're not really intellectual elites, but they like to think they are intellectual elites. And who are these intellectual elites? Why are they elites? Because they're elected? Because they're members of unions? Because they're in the civil service? I've never understood who these intellectual elites are and why they're so elite.
Well, they have a certain cachet. They think they went to a particular, they're branded like a cattle. They think that the Ivy League brand allows them certain entree or certain privileges. But you look at Silicon Valley, you have gatekeepers that decide what is hate speech or what is not. And they control the expressions of 7 billion people on the planet because they are morally better than we are. You turn on public TV and you get this, or cable TV, and you get this anguish about, these people, or the deplorables, the irredeemables, the clingers. I think there was, they used the term East Germans. I've heard that said. I think John McCain called them wacko birds and those people. So there was a real contempt for people they feel that don't properly know how to use their freedom and their economic clout, and they do stupid stuff. They buy clout, and they do stupid stuff. They buy jet skis, they go snowmobiling, and they pollute the universe. And if you can just have this international global elite that have proper education, proper resumes, proper CVs, sober and judicious, they can all get around and they can say, you know what, we're doing it all for you. And of course, throughout history, we've seen these people, and they all have one thing in common, that they're all excused, or they're not subject to the ramifications of their own ideology. So,
when we come back, I want to ask you about the ramifications, or your insight into this election that just occurred, and what you think of the result, and why you think we got the result that we did. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, almost every weeknight, you can watch me on Levin TV by going to crtv.com/Mark, crtv.com/Mark, or call us at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We'll be right back.
Time there's a recount in Arizona and Florida, or even Georgia, or especially where I am in California, 4 seats that were won and then lost. And it's kind of the opposite of what Napoleon said at Austerlitz. You know, he said, at 11 o'clock I've lost Europe, at 3 o'clock I won it. Well, I thought on election day we'd won more. We'd only lost 26 or 7.
Do we ever win seats that we were losing 5 days later? I can't think of many.
No, I think maybe 20 years ago when older people were the absentee ballots, but now it's the SCIU, the mobilized people, and that Democrats are much better at it than Republicans, and that we thought we could learn. The other thing, in these very close races where we lost some good people, we've got this missing 4 to 5. The so-called deplorable, the Trump-based parole voters, whatever, they were there. But now there's going to be a great discussion. Where do you pick up the missing 5% that would have won you some of these good Senate seats? Is it to appeal to the African American community and say, I think Trump might want to consider that, go into the inner city and say, you know what, I may have said things, you may have said things we didn't get along, but I want you to have leverage over your employer. I want you to have a choice of jobs. I gave you an opportunity in an economy, and I think you're going to take advantage of it. And I think that's what I'm worried. I want you to be powerful. And I think he could save the Latino community. When we close that border and make it legal and meritocratic, guess what? Your communities can have AP in the classes. They don't have to have bilingual education. Your kids are not going to be bullied by gang members from Central America. And you're going to be in such demand that your wages are going to climb, as they went 3% this year. And then we have that other missing, I don't know, maybe you know better than I do, and that's the proverbial, I don't know who they are, but the cable liberals keep talking about the suburban women that are turned off, and we've lost them. Maybe so. I don't know when he said Stormy Daniels was horse-faced, maybe that turns them off. I don't know, but there's 3 to 4%, and that you don't need it all in one place. You can get 1% here and 2. He's very close, but he's going to need a little bit of boost if they have a credible candidate in 2020.
Isn't part of the problem, maybe it's in the suburbs, the way the media frame this debate? They don't even frame a debate.
No, they don't frame a debate.
Now, the last 6 months, the president's been called Hitler. His administration has been compared to the Third Reich.
Yeah.
He's been accused of creating internment camps for immigrants. That would actually be FDR, but you know, who's counting? He's been accused of being a racist because he wants to secure the border. He's been accused of being anti-Semitic, despite the fact he's the greatest president, I would argue, for the Jews and the Jewish people in Israel that we've ever had. And he has a Jewish daughter and son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren. He's been called things I've never heard a president called in my life, and it gets worse and worse and worse on cable TV, out of the Democrat Party. Could it be that that has some impact on the 2-3%?
I think it has a lot. When I was saying that he needs an extra 3 and 5, that's working within a system in which 93% of the press coverage the first 100 days was negative from NBC and MSNBC and CNN. So when he gets at the rallies and Trump says, look up there, fake news, I don't say he's demagoguing. I say to myself, wow, these impressive bylines told us that Anthony Scaramucci was involved with a Russian hedge fund when it was a lie, or Donald Trump Jr. knew of the WikiLeaks trove in advance, not true, or that Donald Trump knew of this meeting, not true, or that James Comey was going to come into Congress and refute all of their private, not true. Then I look at Anderson Cooper and I think of the scatology that he mentioned, or this, you remember the religion editor for CNN? He said Trump is a piece of, we haven't seen that before, or Michael Hayden or James Clapper calling the president either, in the case of Clapper, treasonous, or Hayden invoking the Third Reich, or that Julia Joff saying that he's radicalized more people, all without pushback. So this all came from CNN. We're not talking about Kathy Griffith with the decapitated head, or the jokes about Trump crashing a jet. There's a whole corpus of examples that we don't hear about, but we have privilege if you want to take the effort to learn about it. So when he says, look at those people, he has grounds to do that.
And yet, this president has been relatively passive when it comes to action on the media. John Adams, Sedition Act, locked up journalists, Abraham Lincoln's executive order, when the New York newspaper printed a fake presidential proclamation. He ordered his generals to arrest the editors and the journalists, and they shut down almost 300 papers. Whatever you think about it, that's what he did. Woodrow Wilson set up a whole intelligence operation against the media and the New Sedition Act of 1918. You've got FDR going after publishers. You got Obama going after reporters. Trump hasn't done any of that.
No, he has an effect psychologically on the journalists because he conveys the idea that he doesn't have respect for them. He has contempt because they violated their journalistic ethos. And for them, that psychology of being rejected by the president hurts them more than the actual deeds that you recited. Remember, Obama went after the AP reporters. He went after James Rosen at Fox. Remember that he actually said on the campaign trail, you should debate Sean Hannity. I think he said, you'll tear him up. Mm-hmm. If Trump said that, you'll tear somebody up. So it's, for them, it's something about Trump, his speech, his mannerism, his appearance. It's not just journalists either. He is an affront to their cultural and social sensitivities of what is proper and improper.
Could it be his very existence? Because he fights back, he calls them out by name, he'll go after the media outlet, and he'll say fake news in this particular organization is the enemy of the people?
I think so. I mean, we're accustomed to sources say, an anonymous, an unnamed person said. We know in a lot of those cases that just didn't happen. A person writes a creative story and calls it journalism. And then they hide behind this facade that we are journalists and we're professionals and we're from a hallowed Edward R. Murrow tradition. It's true, but it's like a chain. The weakest link destroys it. They haven't done anything in their generation to honor the people who gave them that tradition. And they're actually traitors to that tradition. But a guy like Jim Acosta goes to those press conferences with Sarah Sanders, and his point is, how can I virtue signal to the people in the room that I'm morally superior? How can I make her stutter or make her pause? Or how can I tell my bosses that I'm part of the resistance? Or how can I get the CNN brand name as out there on front? It's not to say to the American people, I got to clarify, I got to find out what the President of the United States wants. That's not the purpose of why he's there.
I want to pursue this further when we return. We'll be right back.
I'm Lauren Green. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg making a massive $1.8 billion donation to his alma mater, Johns Hopkins University. The president of the university called the gift transformative, saying it will allow the school to eliminate student loans so it can commit to bringing in the highest achieving students regardless of their ability to pay. Incumbent Florida Senator Bill Nelson conceding his seat to GOP challenger Governor Rick Scott. The announcement came just after today's deadline for the manual vote recount, that is, which showed Governor Scott leading by some 10,000 votes. President Trump congratulated Scott on Twitter, saying that he was a great governor and will be an even greater senator. I'm Lauren Green. Now back to Life, Liberty, and Levin.
CNN, Jim Acosta bring this lawsuit. They hired Ted Olson, who was a former Reagan official, his partner, Ted Boutros. These are Supreme Court litigators. I read the brief. I think it's preposterous. I mean, let's go through this a little bit. CNN has multiple reporters at the White House who have these hard passes. Jim Acosta can make a request every day to go in. He just doesn't have a hard pass where he can come in willy-nilly. Presidential press conferences started with Woodrow Wilson. Is there anything in the Constitution that compels a president to hold a presidential press conference, to call on somebody from CNN, to call on Jim Acosta? Is there anything that compels any of this?
No, there's not. And Jim Acosta can't take his shoes off and walk around barefooted either, because there's protocols and norms of behavior in every endeavor. I can't get on an airliner and be a stewardess and wear a pro-Obama or pro-Trump hat. They have the right to say, in this particular area, there's protocol. I was a professor for 35 years, and if I had hijacked a class the way he hijacks a press conference and just sermonized or pontificated, I would be called up to the dean, and he would say, you know, you have freedom of expression, but not to violate.
Do you think a lawyer in the Supreme Court who conducted himself the way Jim Acosta did would be able to just continue to go on and on and on in the Supreme Court? He'd be thrown out and held in contempt,
he'd be held in contempt and thrown out, especially if he argued, especially if he got in physical contact with a bailiff or somebody.
Well, what do you make of their argument? But it's vigorous, aggressive freedom of the press, and the president doesn't just like them. Does Jim Acosta advance the cause of the press and freedom of the press and information to the American people?
No, he doesn't. I mean, we all give lectures, so we go through this. Everybody who gives a lecture, a teacher, a public speaker, knows that there's 8 or 9 good questions. The purpose of the question is to elicit information, clarification of a point made, and there's always one person or two who pontificate, and they say, before I ask, and we always say, please ask the question, and they will not ask their question. They want to hector you, and then finally you say, will somebody please get him off the stage, or will somebody make him ask a question? And that's all it is. And he's dressed this up in the First Amendment, and that he's some kind of wounded fawn or a martyr to the cause of the resistance. And he's not. He's doing disservice to the colleagues around him, who he's monopolizing their time. He's destroying the decorum of the press conference. And the irony, of course, is there's been no president that's been more transparent than Donald Trump. You yell at him, you scream at him, and he'll turn around. Really well-known journalist said to me once, I don't think I can vote for him. I said, why? He said, in front of a debate, I just walked up to him. There was no staff, there were no prep books, and I just walked and talked to him. And then I thought that was great. But he was saying there were no barriers, no substations between Trump and the public. And so Acosta got what he wanted. He got a very transparent, accessible president. And yet he's not acting like a journalist, and he knows it. And this is not just Jim Acosta. Remember, Jim Rutenberg, I think, from the New York Times, said this is an age in which we require partisanship. And I think Christian Amanpour said we can't be neutral. We can be truthful, but we cannot be neutral.
There's a fellow by the name of Matthew Pressman.
Yeah.
And he's a professor. And he's written a book that just came out. And the subtitle of his book is Liberal Values But Not Liberal Bias. And I read the book. And I'm unconvinced. I'm convinced what he said about the 60s and 70s, the media decided then it's not enough to just report objective fact, that you need to present it in an interpretive form with liberal values. That doesn't mean there isn't that doesn't mean there is liberal bias. And yet we see it all the time, don't we? Every survey, you just mentioned one, 93% negative on Trump. But it's not just Trump. They're negative on conservatives, they're negative on Republicans, and they bring some of the most preposterous members of Congress onto their programs. And they make those decisions too, right?
I think it gets down to a fundamental philosophical idea that they feel that their noble ends, and I think that we agree those ends are sort of a radical egalitarianism, require any means necessary to achieve them, in a way that Republicans and conservatives, their means are more selfish, because liberty is not as an exalted virtue as equality. Sort of the French Revolution versus the American Revolution. And therefore they feel we can violate canons of behavior, we can scratch our nails on the Supreme Court door. What would they have done if they broke it into the door? Would they have swarmed the Kavanaugh family? We didn't think they can stand up and disrupt, and this is all for a noble cause and therefore justified. And if a Republican did it, it would be for this, you didn't build that crowd, or now's not the time to profit people. And so it's been age-old, it's throughout Western civilization, but I'm worried. I think that we now have these force multipliers, social media, the internet, great wealth, and we're reaching a
I'll give you another
critical
example
mass.
of the left. When it comes to the Second Amendment, they'll say things like, well, you know, the framers of the Second Amendment didn't know about semi-automatic weapons. They didn't know about sniper rifles. They didn't know about this. They didn't know about that. It's muskets. Therefore, we can regulate whatever we want. Okay, well, let's talk about the First Amendment. There was no TV. There was no radio. There was no cable. There were no satellite. And yet it's a preposterous argument, isn't it? And yet when it comes to the Second Amendment, it's an argument that they make. When it comes to the First Amendment, anything goes except what they disagree with, like conservative talk radio and Fox News, and they don't like necessarily bloggers on social media. They want to regulate the internet. They want to get rid of conservative talk radio. So they're really not for freedom of the press, are they?
No, I think we're seeing something unique in the last, I think the Obama administration encouraged people to come out of the woodwork. And I think we're seeing not just the traditional left-wing assault on the Second Amendment. I think they're going after the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and the First Amendment because they don't believe in free speech. They have this new term called hate speech. And somebody can arbitrarily determine what you say is either homophobic, racist, protectionist, nativist, etc. And therefore you can't say it. That's pretty much institutionalized on campus. We've seen with matters of sexual assault or accusations of such, you don't really have due process in a lot of places in corporations, the workplace, or on campus. And so I don't believe that I think they feel that the Bill of Rights, unlike the old ACLU, the new ACLU believes that's an impediment to a progressive future.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, every week, you can see me most weeknights on Levin TV. Just go to crtv.com/mark, crtv.com/mark, or call 84 immigration issue as it relates to this election we just had. You know, I can remember the second term of Reagan. He won massive popular vote. Same with his first term. Massive electoral college victory. In fact, George H.W. Bush won California by a significant amount. California's gone. Other states are gone. Arizona's now purple, moving to blue. New Mexico's more blue than it is purple. Colorado's blue. Colorado used to be red. Nevada's blue. Used to be red. And they're turning other states. You look at Texas. The vote out of Texas was not great. We lost 3 or 4 members of Congress. Even Abbott, who's enormously popular, and $100 million wasn't spent against Abbott, he got 55, 56% of the vote. At the lower levels, the Republicans got blown out in some of these counties too. Every major metropolitan area now is blue. You don't have enough rural voters to balance that. Are we in big trouble?
Well, I think in the short term we are, because the Democratic Party is a pyramid now. It's a medieval party of very wealthy. All the big fortunes are no longer in mining or farming or gas and oil. They're in high-tech, Silicon Valley, you know, Warren Buffett, the Facebook people, the Google people, the Amazon people. And that's the fuel of this. And then a professional elite beneath them. And then we have the impoverished, and many of them are recent immigrants. And they work hand in glove, and they flip these states that were red and purple into blue. And it's a coalition between, I call them the suburban elites and very poor people. And it's funny though, Mark, where I live in California, very poor southwest Fresno County, the people who drive the Democratic Party don't want to live with the people they count on their votes, because they feel that socially, culturally, educationally, whatever, they're not comfortable with them. So that gives us hope, because the Republican Party now is a workers' party, entrepreneurial, middle-class party. And one thing we know about people of that class, they feel familiar with, and they like people of different races and different classes. So it's easy. It's a Republican congressman from Ohio is probably going to be more accessible than a Bay Area congressman, even though they're very different politics. Shut the border and let the engine of assimilation, integration, intermarriage work. And I think in 20 years, this is why I'm optimistic long-term, very pessimistic like you short-term, we'd have a replication of this Italian-American experience where if your name's Cuomo or Giuliani, we can't predict your political affinities. But short-term, we've got to shut the border, and we've got to get back to the melting pot and junk this salad bowl.
But this issue of assimilation, I find that's where it's different.
Yeah.
And that's what worries me 20, 30 years out. Private institutions don't put assimilation, you know, PRIS 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, that sort of thing. We have affirmative action plans in the government. They don't push assimilation. The EEOC, we have it at the state level too. But even more than that, we have a Democrat Party that is committed to balkanization. Oh. The way their leaders talk, the way they govern, they don't want assimilation because of the very reason you say.
Yeah.
Because assimilation works against their ideology and throws them out of office.
And their ideology, by, I think what you're suggesting is their ideology on its own facts and merits can't get 51% of the electorate. So they have to change the electorate. And that means bring in voters that have an instant grievance. It's pretty crazy when a person from Oaxaca crosses 1 inch into America and then plugs into the whole affirmative action grievance industry, even though he's never been an American. We've never done anything oppressive to somebody in Oaxaca. And we saw the Elizabeth Warren fiasco, the Ward Churchill, stuff like that. So there are limits to identity politics just because it's getting to the level of DNA badges. And it's contrary to the whole liberal idea of Martin Luther King, you know, the content of our character. It's all about the color of our skin and our superficial appearances. But the revolution always devours its own. We're in sort of a Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre. When you saw that hearing, poor old Dianne Feinstein reminded me of a Bourbon king trying to deal with Spartacus, you know. And
especially the Bourbon part.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. It seems to me with these colleges and universities, they have like an oligopoly.
Yeah.
What do we do about this?
Well, it used to be sort of esoteric, and that was a problem within the university. But now it's permeated into the society because the entire demography, we're getting these late 20-somethings that are graduating in 6-8 years. And to the extent they do, a lot of them have anthropology or social science degrees. They're not employable. They have this staggering $70,000, $80,000 debt. They can't buy a home. They don't get married. They don't have children. It affects the entire country. And I think the universities are largely to blame. They need to be a truth of advertising. When somebody comes in there saying, this is how much money you will borrow, this is how much interest you will pay, and this is the chance, the likelihood this major will get you a job. And we're just going to be honest with you. They're not even subject to the laws that used car salesmen are. They've got to be very candid about that. And then we can't ask that the 70% or 65% that don't go to college to subsidize those who do. So we need more trade schools. We need the federal government probably to get out of it, because by guaranteeing those student loans, the university's been jacking up tuition, diversity jars, assistant provosts for inclusion, rock climbing walls. They're jacking up the rate of tuition and cost over the rate of inflation. You know. Get back to an idea that used to be, we teach you two things: to be inductive in the way you think, and a body of literature, science, math, philosophy, so you can be informed. And what your politics were your own business. But now we're turning out an arrogant, indoctrinated cohort, and they're ignorant, because I'm not sure that a BA means that they're any more educated than somebody who's working on a farm in Fresno County.
I think this is one of the keys to the survival of the republic, really. The educational system, both at the public school level and at the college and university level. And I think those are great ideas. I also think the states that primarily subsidize these state-run colleges and universities, particularly those with Republican governors and legislatures, really need to step up. Yeah. And we hear about diversity all the time, except when it comes to more of a pro-American principles, pro-American founding arguments in these colleges and universities. You have people who want to speak at these universities, who are shouted down, who are attacked, who have a different viewpoint. It's like the last place of the Soviet Union. You know, these are supposed to be academic freedom and free speech. It's the opposite of that.
Well, they believe that the family, the religion, the institution, the corporation, whatever, is all biased. So they have you for 4 or 6 years. So they can be biased to counteract the larger bias. But the fact is that these institutions that are supposedly biased, as you know, are becoming progressive as well. But it's very hard. I was a classics professor. It's very hard to teach Latin and Greek grammar or history of Western culture or Thucydides or Aristophanes versus, let me just tell you about myself and what I had to put up with today and what George W. Bush did to me or what Donald. That's easy. And we kind of make it too difficult. A lot of this watering down the curriculum are people who are not educated, they're not trained well, and they just want to vent and rant. And I'm getting to the point where I think tenure is really a questionable institution.
When we come back, the big question. Victor Davis Hanson, the big question, next 5 to 10 years, country going this way or the country going this way?